King Midas asked for one upgrade. Just one. Not a bigger army. Not a safer kingdom. Not better harvests. Not peace. Gold. More gold. Infinite gold. Gold on command. And that sounds smart for about 10 seconds. Then the math turns evil. 2 hands. 1 wish. 0 meals. 0 drinks. 1 dead household. I'm Prometheus. And let me say this clearly. The gods do not always break mortals with lightning. Sometimes they do it with incentives. Sometimes they hand you exactly what you asked for, then sit back and watch your life collapse under the weight of your own ambition. That is what happened to Midas. If you strip away the fairy tale version, this is not a greed is bad bedtime story. This is palace politics. This is divine psychology. This is a live test run of a very old Olympus strategy. Find the mortal's weakness, wrap it as a reward, call the disaster a blessing. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory, good. Greek myth is full of conspiracies that turned out to be family policy 5 scenes later. Because the gods were not a healthy family. They were a royal house with immortality, paranoia, ego, and no adult supervision. And Midas was about to learn what happens when a dysfunctional divine family notices a mortal who wants too much. The timeline starts with Silenus, not with gold. Not yet. Silenus was the old drunk in Dionysus's orbit. Half holy, half chaos, fully unreliable. In the myth record, he gets separated from Dionysus's group, and Midas receives him, hosts him, and returns him properly. That is the key trigger. 1 act of hospitality, 1 favor returned, 1 problem loaded into the chamber. Now look at the politics. Dionysus is not the boring kind of god. He is not a spreadsheet god. He is theater, appetite, intoxication, release, madness, pleasure. He understands something Zeus's whole family keeps proving by accident. People are easier to rule when they think they are choosing freely. So Dionysus says, in effect, "You treated my old man well. Ask me for 1 reward. 1 reward. That is all. No contract, no legal review, no risk disclosure." And this is where Midas fails the character test. Because a person's first wish is usually a confession. He could have asked for stability. He could have asked for wisdom. He could have asked for protection for his house. Instead, he asked for conversion power. Let whatever I touch become gold. That is not just greed. That is ideology. It means he had already decided that value and gold were the same thing. And once a king believes that, disaster is usually on a timer. Dionysus does not argue. That matters. In Ovid's version, Bacchus agrees, even regretting that Midas chose badly. That is a brilliant detail. The god knows this will end badly. He still grants it. That is Olympus in 1 move. Terrible idea. Approved. Midas leaves excited. Of course he does. He wants proof fast. So he starts small. A twig, gold. A stone, gold. A clump of earth, gold. Dry grain, gold. An apple, gold. Doorposts, gold. Ovid stacks these tests almost like a demo reel. Midas is practically stress testing the feature set. You can hear him thinking, it works. It actually works. I've done it. I've beaten uncertainty. And for 1 short, stupid, glorious window, he feels untouchable. This is the false victory zone, and it is important, because the curse would not be memorable if it started with pain. It starts with dopamine, with validation, with that dangerous little voice in a powerful man's head that says, I was right to want more. That is how collapses begin, not with alarms, with self-congratulation. And if palace rumors are to be believed, Midas was already mentally spending wealth he had not yet understood. More tribute, more leverage, more fear in rival courts, more control at home. That is how mortals become assets. First they want power, then they become predictable, then they become usable. Then hunger arrives. Quietly, he reaches for food. Bread turns hard in his hand. He blinks. Fine, another loaf. Same result. He grabs fruit. Gold. He reaches for wine. Wrong move. In Ovid's telling, even liquid becomes part of the curse. The drops running from his hands shine like gold. That is the nightmare. The problem is not storage. The problem is intake. Now the wish changes category. It is no longer a wealth miracle. It is a body problem, a throat problem, a survival problem. 2 hands, 1 stomach, 0 working meals. He tries again because denial always gets a scene. Slowly this time. He tears bread with the back of his fingers. Gold. He tips a cup carefully. Gold. He tells himself maybe intent matters. It doesn't. Maybe pressure matters. It doesn't. Maybe he can learn control. He can't. That's when the palace mood shifts. Servants freeze. A tray drops. Nobody wants to approach too close. The king is now a contamination point in a crown. And here is my critical opinion. This is the real horror of the myth, even before later storytellers add the daughter. Midas does not become rich. He becomes unusable. He turns utility into display. He confuses wealth with life, and his body is the first thing forced to pay for that confusion. That is why this myth still works. Because modern people do this too. Different metal, same sickness. Now Midas understands the rule. Everything he touches becomes valuable and worthless. That is the twist. Gold looks like the highest form of value until you need bread more than beauty and water more than status. He stares at the table. Perfect plates, perfect cups, perfect decorations, useless. If you want the mortal asset timeline, here it is clean. Phase 1, Midas is a useful host. Phase 2, Midas is offered a reward. Phase 3, Midas reveals his weakness by choosing gold. Phase 4, Dionysus turns that weakness into a live demonstration. Phase 5, Midas becomes a warning to every other mortal watching. That is not random. That is system logic. And yes, I know somebody will say, Prometheus, that sounds like you're reading a conspiracy into the myth. Of course I am. Have you met this family? Cronus ate his children. Zeus overthrew his father. Hera weaponized jealousy. Apollo punished pride. Artemis punished breaches. Dionysus punished disrespect and rewarded appetite with traps. This is not a healthy pantheon. This is a royal family with divine power and generational trauma. So when Midas finally whispers, "What have I done?" he is already too late, because the curse has moved beyond economics. Now it is about touch. And once a human being loses safe touch, the story is no longer about money. It is about isolation. In the oldest core version, that isolation is already enough. Midas cannot eat, cannot drink, cannot live normally. That is the classical backbone. But later retellings push the emotional truth harder. They bring in the daughter. And honestly, I understand why that version survived. Because nothing explains a bad wish faster than putting it in a father's arms. She comes in at the worst possible time. Maybe she hears the panic. Maybe she sees servants backing away. Maybe she just sees her father scared. Father? That one word is enough. For a second, the room stops being about gold. It becomes human again. Midas turns. Don't. Too late. She runs to him. He reacts the way parents react. Not like a strategist. Not like a king. Like a father under stress. He reaches out, and then the story lands the knife. Warm child. Cold statue. 1 second of life. Then stillness. No villain speech. No long warning. Just instant result. That is why this scene hits. Because the curse does not merely punish greed. It punishes misvaluation. He wanted a kingdom no one could threaten. Instead, he weaponized his own hands against his own house. If you want a line that sums up Midas's mistake, it is this. He asked for more of what shines and lost contact with what matters. That is not poetry. That is accounting. Bad accounting. Now the king breaks. Not elegantly, not symbolically. He begs, and this is the first intelligent thing he has done since making the wish. Take it back. No more boasting, no more expansion fantasy, no more royal confidence. Take it back. I was wrong. In Ovid, Bacchus gives him a way out. Go to the river Pactolus, reach its source, wash, and the curse will leave him. So he runs. Not like a king, like a starving man with a death sentence in his hands. He reaches the river and throws himself into the water. Hands first, then arms, then all of him. He is not cleansing dignity. He is trying to survive. And the river takes it. That is the miracle reversal. The gift leaves him. The curse drains out. The gold passes into the water, and the old story says the sands of Pactolus carried that gold after. Notice the irony. Gold was not destroyed. It was relocated, back where it belonged. Outside the body, outside the mouth, outside the family embrace. That is the lesson. Gold is useful at a distance, deadly at the center. Midas survives, and survival matters more than death here, because a dead king ends a scene. A living king spreads a warning. One wish, one river, one ruined illusion. That is enough to change how mortals think about divine favor. And after the cure, the old record says Midas turned away from riches and toward the countryside in Pan. Even then, his judgment stayed weak, and that leads into the next disaster later with Apollo's music contest. In other words, he learned but not enough. That detail matters. Because people want myth to work like a neat moral machine. Bad choice, painful lesson, permanent wisdom. That is not how humans work. Not then, not now. Midas is not memorable because he was evil. He is memorable because he was normal in an exaggerated way. He believed more wealth meant more safety. More gold meant more control. More possession meant less fear. A lot of people still believe that. That is why this story keeps breathing. My final opinion? The Midas case proves Olympus does not need to invade a kingdom with fire every time it wants control. Sometimes all a god has to do is approve the wrong dream. That is more efficient, more elegant, more terrifying. And it prepares the next phase of the larger timeline. Humans learn that divine favor can be lethal. Fear deepens, caution spreads. But the gods do not become wiser. They become more vain, more theatrical, more reckless. They start treating mortal kingdoms like disposable game boards. So remember Midas correctly, not as a cartoon miser, as a man who asked for power in the language he trusted most and discovered too late that the gods had turned his desire into a trap. He wanted the world in gold. He nearly lost the right to touch it at all.